This podcast is brought to you by Dr. Kirk Elliott, PhD. In an uncertain economy and an uncertain world, if you're looking for wealth management solutions and financial advice, go to kirkelliottphd.com and make an appointment today. Coming up, who bears responsibility for the sudden and unforeseen Hamas attack on Israel? I'm going to argue that the Biden regime is not only negligent, but subsidized the attacks through its $6 billion release of funds to the Iranian regime, which is in league with Hamas. Human rights attorney Brooke Goldstein joins me. She's based in Israel. We're going to talk about the situation on the ground, the rhetoric of moral equivalence from the left around the world, and what we can expect next. Hey, if you're watching on listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, or watching on Rumble, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Show.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast.
Given the events in Israel, the massive terrorist attack launched by Hamas, I'm going to devote most of this, virtually all of the podcast, to that single topic. But just a brief announcement before I get into it. Related to police state. So we have sold out now our first theaters. I believe there are 3 theaters that are sold out. And I want to tell you this because as we get a little closer to the release, theaters start selling out and then people scramble. Oh, I wanted to go. I can't get tickets. Dinesh, can you add more theaters? We won't be able to add more theaters now. We've made kind of a deal with the theater chains. And so get the tickets while they are available and don't wait until you can't get them. The website is policestatefilm.net. Now, by the way, if you can't go to the theater because it's, too far away, it's 40 minutes away, Dinesh, or you can't go those days, October 23rd or 25th, that's okay. Do the virtual premiere. The virtual premiere, you watch from the comfort of your home. Live music related to the film. We screen the film, and then a live Q&A with Dan Bongino and me, and it's all for the price of a movie ticket. Where can you get tickets for that? Same place, policestatefilm.net. Now, what happened in Israel is a big deal, and in many ways it is reminiscent of 9/11. Why? Number one, the audacity of the attack. I mean, in 9/11, no one saw it coming, no one expected it. It was carried out with a kind of perverse and wicked genius, the using of planes as battering rams to slam into buildings. And here you have 1,000 or so Hamas terrorists backed by Iran. This is a carefully planned and coordinated attack. They come tunneling through the border checkpoints. They are able to evade checkpoints. Some of them come through the air. In other words, there was one almost surreal scene of Hamas fighters like paragliding down with their weaponry into Israeli neighborhoods. They seize Israeli towns and hold them. They kind of have their way with Israeli families. I mean, this is something that we have not seen in a very long time, if ever. And so you have a death count. I think it's currently around 800, but lots of people unaccounted for, lots of people missing. Now, this is clearly a giant intelligence failure, but an intelligence failure not merely on the part of Israel, but also on the part of U.S. intelligence. Why? Because U.S. intelligence is supposed to be the best in the world. It's supposed to be monitoring things around the world. So how is it possible that Israeli intelligence, which is second to none, when Debbie and I went to Israel, was it last year, honey? It's Israeli intelligence is at a different category. Normally you go on a plane and then you arrive. They have no idea really who you are. You go through passport control. They kind of click your passport, and if nothing comes up, you go right through. But the guy sitting behind the desk has no idea who you are, why you're coming, what you're there for, where you've been before. But in Israel, it's a whole different thing. When you get on the plane to go to Israel, they know exactly who you are. They've already looked you up. They have a map of your background. They know whether you need to take off your shoes or not. And a lot of people don't have to take off their shoes because they know exactly who you are. So when you have this level of intelligence, how can not one, not two, not five, but 1,000 militant Hamas killers get into Israel in this way? Now, I don't know the answer to that, but I will say that it could be, and I say this because this is also a warning to us, that in a highly divided society, Israel is just as divided as the United States. There has been bitter battles between the Netanyahu people and Netanyahu's opponents, mutual recriminations. And when they're all focused on that, they're all focused, how do we block Netanyahu's attempt to reform the Supreme Court? And so on, all the attention gets caught up in, let's get our political opponent. And then you forget that there are enemies of the whole country that are out to get you, and you're not keeping an eye on them. A second point to be made relative to the United States is it's quite possible that we never saw this coming. And I know we never saw this coming. There's a video of National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan last week, quote, "The Middle East is quieter today than it has been for 2 decades." So this moron had no idea, right? He's supposed to be an intelligence chief. He has no clue. And again, why? And one theory, and I'm only offering it as a theory, is our intelligence agencies have redefined their mission. They're focused on domestic terrorism and domestic extremism, people like you and me. So they're tracking grandmothers, they're following kids, they're chasing people with MAGA flags, they're monitoring Trump rallies. And so because they've got this insane and meaningless focus, as if domestic terrorism is the greatest threat that the country faces, as a result, they're not paying attention to the people that they should be paying attention to. Let's think about it. After 9/11, a lot of us, me included, sort of handed over all this police power to the US government to focus on, well, who? Exactly the kind of people who carried out these attacks. Islamic radicals and terrorists abroad who have nefarious schemes aimed at America, aimed at the West, aimed at our allies like Israel. We haven't been watching them because we've been obsessed with something entirely domestic. Last month, the G20 group announced it welcomed discussion of the effects of implementing central bank digital currencies in their current countries. These digital currencies could allow the government to track every purchase you make. They could even allow officials to prohibit you from purchasing certain products or easily freeze or seize part or all of your money. In essence, they enable the government to control your finances. Now, concerned Americans are diversifying their assets into physical gold with the help of Birch Gold Group. If you want a physical asset held in a tax-sheltered retirement account, you should call Birch Gold. Debbie and I are customers. We buy our gold through Birch Gold. But find out for yourself. Text Dinesh to 989898. They'll send you a free information kit on gold. Here's an easy way to become a customer. If you have an IRA or 401k from a previous employer, Birch Gold can help you convert it into an IRA in gold. You don't pay a penny out of pocket. Text Dinesh to 989898. Claim your free information kit on gold and call Birch Gold, because if digital currency becomes a reality, it's going to be nice to have some gold to fall back on. In the wake of the attacks on Israel by Hamas, we're hearing a lot of the Biden people and their apologists saying, in effect, Republicans bear responsibility because our government is now in chaos. Tommy Tuberville, the senator from Alabama, is holding up the appointments of the Assistant Secretary of Defense and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of this and so on. He needs to immediately drop his objections. No, he's not going to, nor should he. Or Republicans need to put Kevin McCarthy back as Speaker of the House, because then we're going to have some order and we can now start approving the kind of aid and the kind of things that need to be done. No, we're not going to be doing that either. All of this is a sort of smokescreen that is being put up by the Biden people to avoid one simple fact, and that is that just a few weeks ago, the Biden regime released $6 billion to go to Iran. Now, they say this isn't taxpayer money, this is Iranian money, but it was Iranian money that was frozen under sanctions laws. This would be like there are sanctions currently against Russia, against Venezuela. When you pull back the sanctions and release the money, that's the same as giving them the money. They now have access to the money. And then you hear the Biden apologists, well, not 1 cent of that money has even been spent. It is sitting in a bank account. Well, first of all, if you give me $6 billion and I haven't spent it yet, but it's sitting in a bank account, can't I borrow against it? Don't I know that that money is coming? And if I have other money of my own, I can then spend that, knowing that it will quickly be replenished. In other words, this is known in banking, in finance, as the fungibility of money. And so it's kind of amazing that here you have the Biden regime actively subsidizing Iranian terror. I mean, there's a clip from September of the Iranian leader saying, look, you're not going to tell us what we do with the money. We're going to do with the money exactly what we want to do with the money. And so even though I saw literally hundreds of posts, not 1 cent has been spent, basically the defense of the Biden apologist comes down to this. Not 1 cent of the $6 billion we gave Iran was spent on this particular act of terrorism. It's almost like they're only going to take responsibility if you show that the exact same dollar bills that were given to Iran, they used that money on the terrorism. Now, to expose the illogic of all this, imagine this. You need a new car really badly, but you can't afford one. And so your dad gives you $20,000 and says, well, listen, you can spend the money on food, on clothing, on rent, on mortgage, on utilities, but you can't spend this money on buying a car. Now, will you be able to buy the car? Yeah, probably. Why? Because you've got the same amount of money that it costs to buy you the car. You can now use your money to buy the car and use the new money that's coming in to spend on all the other things that you otherwise would have to pay for. So this is, again, the fungibility of money. And finally, Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, was confronted this by NBC News, by Kristen Welker, and she said, money is fungible. What do you say to the fact that we just gave money to Iran? And then Anthony Blinken goes, Iran has unfortunately, I'm quoting him, always used and focused its funds on supporting terrorism. Boom. So here the guy breaks down and admits that, guess what? Sad to say, we bankrolled this. The United States helped this to happen. And now, when I say we bankrolled this, I'm not saying that the primary responsibility of the terrorism was not done by the terrorists. Obviously, they are the main ones. They did it. And so there's an interesting tweet put out by the Republican Accountability Project. They're like, anybody who presumes to blame the U.S. for this is itself, they are themselves the problem. Anyone whose first thought is to blame the U.S. And I'm like, no, that's actually not my first thought, but that is my second thought. In other words, my first thought is to focus on the act of terrorism itself, but pretty soon you get to other questions. What was the intelligence failure that caused this to happen? Who supplied the funds that enabled Iran to do this? And then you go, isn't it a fact that A, Biden gave them the money? True. Isn't it a fact that Iran was actively involved in the planning and helped to carry out this terrorist scheme? True. Check. And therefore, putting those two things together, our money meaning the United States releasing the funds, the Biden regime letting them have the funds. And by the way, there's a little bit of a history to this that's worth pointing out. Long before Biden, Obama sent, what was it, honey, $400 million in packets, in suitcases to the Iranians. So think about it. We've been shoveling money into this terrorist regime that we know is a terrorist regime. And yet when an act of terrorism is then perpetrated with the help of these guys and with the organizational support of these guys, then you have all the Biden apologists going, no, that really wasn't us. You can't find, this reminds me of the business with COVID, where they're funding the gain of function research. And yet the moment you have an epidemic, the virus gets out, they're like, oh, you know what? You can't prove that it was really our funding. No, we only funded laboratories in America, even though those were working with Wuhan. So again and again, we find that these things have long tentacles. And in this case, the tentacles extend, sadly, to the Biden regime right here in the United States. If aches and pains are your problem, Relief Factor is your remedy. Debbie and I are proof of this. We started taking Relief Factor a couple of years ago, and what a huge difference we've seen in our joints. Nothing short of amazing. Aches and pains are totally gone thanks to this 100% drug-free solution called Relief Factor. How does it work? Relief Factor supports your body's fight against inflammation. That's the source of aches and pains. More than 1 million people have tried Relief Factor. About 70% have gone on to order more. It works for them. Works for Debbie. She can now do exercises, planks, push-ups that for several years she wasn't able to do. So Relief Factor has been a big game changer for her, her aunt, other members of our family, Mike here in the studio, and for many other people. You too can benefit. Try it for yourself. Order the 3-week quick start for the discounted price of just $19.95. Go to relieffactor.com or call 800-4-RELIEF to find out more about this offer. The number again, 800-4-RELIEF, or go to relieffactor.com. Feel the difference. Guys, our guest today is Brooke Goldstein, and she's been on the podcast before, and unfortunately, we seem to meet here under unfortunate circumstances. The last time I had Brooke Goldstein on, I think she came out of a shelter, a bomb shelter, after an attack against Israel. She lives in Israel, but was on vacation with her family in Italy when the latest attacks occurred. She's a human rights attorney. She founded the Lawfare Project in 2010. It's an American nonprofit based in New York City. It's a legal think tank and also a litigation fund to defend the civil and human rights of Jewish people and pro-Israel community worldwide. The website, by the way, thelawfareproject.org. Brooke, thanks for joining me under these really strange and distressing circumstances. Although we had you on the podcast before and there was an attack on Israel the last time as well, it seems like the events of the last few days are in a completely different category, and that from the point of view of Israelis, really the world changed this past weekend or over these past few days. Explain why.
Well, you're absolutely right. First of all, Dinesh, I want to thank you for having me on, and I want to thank you for continually speaking the truth and telling the world what is really going on amongst so much moral equivalence that is happening in the justification of terror. I'm very grateful to be here. Yes, absolutely. What's happened is very unique, I have to say, is a colossal intelligence and security failure. The people of Israel, and in fact, Jewish people worldwide, are feeling a sense of total insecurity. I don't know if you know this, but Jewish stores are being attacked. There was a Jewish person that was just beaten up in San Diego, because this is not about a regional war, about a piece of land. This is about Jew hatred, and it's the same Jew hatred that we as a people have been dealing with and been victimized by for hundreds of years. Right now, it's theologically motivated Islamist terrorism. Hamas is exactly like ISIS. They are funded and supported by the same people. They engage in the same brutality and murderous tactics. We know now that there has been active coordination and funding by the Iranian regime to support the recent terrorist attack against Israeli civilians. Now, what is so different is that we saw an unprecedented breach of the border between Israel and Gaza, and a security failure that I'm still really having a hard time understanding. We are in a state of shock. The massacre of civilians, over 1,000 Israeli civilians, including U.S. citizens, German citizens, citizens of Nepal, 250 young people who were dancing and celebrating life at a desert party, Holocaust survivors, grandmothers, families massacred before their children, families burned alive in their houses, women taken, dozens of women now being held hostage in Gaza, being raped, their bodies being mutilated, paraded through the streets so Palestinians can further abuse the dead bodies and cheer and hand out sweets. The level of brutality is something I think we haven't seen in a long time. And I guess if you could call it a silver lining, though I'm uncomfortable with that terminology, the world is now waking up. They are now seeing exactly who the Palestinian Islamists are. They are now understanding what so-called pro-Palestinian advocacy is. It is pro-terror advocacy.
So, Brooke, when you talk about the intelligence failure, what you're describing, I think, is the fact that it would be one thing if there were 1 or 5 or maybe even a dozen fighters who infiltrated into southern Israel from Gaza, finding their way to tunnel or get across those border checkpoints and so on. But you're saying for 1,000 fighters, which I think is roughly the number that they've talked about, to get through heavily armed and be able to go door to door in Israeli neighborhoods. Is this what you mean when you say, I don't even understand how this even occurred?
Correct. Absolutely. There are reports of over 1,000, and they're not fighters. They're bloodthirsty, murderous, genocidal, terrorist animals crossed into Israel through land, by sea, and by air. I'm sure you've seen the videos of them coming in these parasails with machine guns, machine gunning down civilians. We were attacked with rocket launchers. These scenes out of Israel are just apocalyptical. There's a video that I uploaded, for example, on Instagram where someone was driving down a highway in the south and there's just bombed out cars and dead bodies. These are highways that I travel frequently. I could have easily been at this desert music festival. I mean, just the thought is so horrifying to me. And then going in Israel, we're used to hearing about the idea of following and tracking and knowing in advance about these plots and taking them down and dealing with them outside of Israel's borders. But to be attacked in Israel like this, for terrorists to hold over 5 Jewish towns in the south for hours and hours without proper military presence to help them, civilians fighting, moms and dads and sisters and brothers fighting with their bare hands to the death, okay? Parents being butchered in front of their own children, children being taken as hostages and taunted on the streets of Gaza. This type of Nazi brutality has not been seen since the Holocaust. We haven't had over 1,000 Jews murdered in one day since the Holocaust. So those of us on social media and in the advocacy world who are constantly saying never again, never again, we're in a state of shock. How is it that in 2023, Jewish people are being massacred in the Jewish state, and yet we are now on social media defending our right to life, defending against people who are justifying these brutal Islamist terrorist attacks? And I want to say something that's so important for Americans in the free world to understand. What starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And the chance that we saw in New York City when hundreds of pro-Hamas demonstrators showed up in New York City were globalize the Intifada. That is what they are chanting. And what they mean is to bring these terroristic tactics, as they have before with 9/11, to Western soil, to US soil, to Europe. And if the Western world doesn't stand firmly in support of life and freedom, then we are going to have a problem, because Iran is behind this, and Iran's tentacles are around the world, and they have sleeper cells around the world So it is paramount that our politicians, that our academia, and that NGOs, and of course the United Nations stand firm and condemn unequivocally, without any type of excuses, this brutal, terroristic murder of civilians, and demand that the hostages immediately be let free.
Let's take a pause. We'll be right back with Brooke Goldstein. Debbie and I are on a really good health journey, but we still struggle to eat enough fruits, veggies, and fiber, and that's a requirement. Now, lucky for us, we discovered Balance of Nature, and what better way to get all your fruits and veggies plus fiber than with Balance of Nature. This is Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies in a capsule, so easy to take, made from fresh whole produce. The produce is powdered after an advanced vacuum cold process, which stabilizes the maximum nutrient content. And this is Balance of Nature's Fiber and Spice, a proprietary blend of fiber and 12 spices for overall and digestive health. Join Debbie and me. Start your journey to better health right now. Call 800-246-8751 or go to balanceofnature.com. You'll get 35% off your first preferred order by using discount code America. Again, it's balanceofnature.com or call 800-246-8751. Get 35% off your first preferred order by using discount code America. I'm back with Brooke Goldstein, Executive Director of the Lawfare Project. The lawfareproject.org is the website. Brooke, to put this in perspective, when 9/11 occurred, we have a country in the United States, 300 million people, 3,000 people died roughly at 9/11. Israel is a country of 9 million Jews in Israel. And so 1,000 people out of 9 million is a far greater percentage. In other words, if you did the math, it works out to something like 20,000 people or more dying at 9/11. And imagine the shock that would be to the United States and its psychology and its conscience. And I think that's the context for you saying that this is perhaps the worst single episode since the Holocaust. Now, given that, what we see in America, we see also in Europe, is some campus movements and some organized movements. I saw, for example, a collection of some 25 or so organizations at Harvard. I was a little distressed to see the Harvard South Asian Society, which I guess includes the Asian Indians in that. Demonstrations and protests in favor of the Palestinians in New York and elsewhere. I mean, just describe your feelings upon seeing this kind of thing in the immediate aftermath. It wasn't even that they waited, and it's like they were right out there as if to say, that was a big win for us.
Yeah. Well, to go to your first point, everybody knows somebody who was killed in these recent disgusting, animalistic, barbaric terrorist attacks. I know mothers and fathers who are still unaware of the location of where their children are. I'm sorry, I'm very emotional.
Yeah.
We're all seeing the pictures of the children who are being kidnapped. We know what's happening to the women right now in Gaza. This is barbarity. And for Americans, they need to understand something. Our campuses, our higher education, our institutions of higher education have been infiltrated by terror supporters, by Islamist radicals who are educating the next generation of American youth in theories that justify terrorism, and not just the killing of Jews, but justify killing civilians of any Western country. This is a poison that we have allowed to infiltrate our educational system. The biggest sponsors of terrorism, namely Qatar. Qatar is the second largest funder of terrorism in the world, has spent $1 billion every year for the past 10 years that we know of, if not more. That is $10 billion in financial grants to schools in the United States to fund departments of diversity and equity, or Middle Eastern study departments, to have teachers teach terror ideology. And our youth and our children are impressionable. And this should be a huge wake-up call for America as they see hundreds of pro-terror demonstrators on the street calling for jihad, a global jihad. And that doesn't mean your own personal struggle. That means violent terrorism to come to the United States, starting with our campuses. We have to wake up. We have to stop the foreign funding on U.S. college campuses. I call on all of these administrations from Harvard to Penn and on to immediately cancel Students for Justice in Palestine, cancel WOL Palestine, WOL Palestine, because they are organizations that spew pro-terror ideology. And this is one of the greatest national security threats that the United States of America is facing right now, is the infiltration of our educational system with pro-terror, radical Islamist, anti-American ideology.
Let's take a pause. We'll be right back with Brooke Goldstein. Mike Lindell has a passion to help you get the best sleep of your life. He didn't just stop with the MyPillow pillows. He also created the Giza Dream bed sheets. These sheets look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep, which is crucial for our overall health. Mike found the world's best cotton called Giza. It's ultra soft and breathable, but also extremely durable. And Mike's latest deal, sale of the year. For a limited time, you get 50% off the Giza Dream sheets, marking prices down as low as $29.98, depending on the size. Go to MyPillow.com, enter promo code Dinesh. There you'll find not just this amazing offer, but deep discounts on all the MyPillow products, the pillows, the robes, the mattress topper, the MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and so much more. Call 800-876-0227. Again, that number, 800-876-0227, or go to MyPillow.com. Make sure to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh. I'm back with Brooke Goldstein, Executive Director of the Lawfare Project. She lives in Israel. She's currently joining us from Italy, where she is with her family. Brooke, I just saw a quotation on social media that struck me, and it was a tweet to the effect that this is what we are just seeing is anti-colonialism in practice. The quotation was to the effect that, what did you think anti-colonialism meant? Did you think it was a theory, an op-ed, a position paper? I guess what the writer was saying is, no, anti-colonialism is guerrilla revolution and terrorism carried out on the street. What we're studying may be the theory, but this is the practice. Now, I think that there are so many Americans who spout the rhetoric of anti-colonialism who have no idea that this is in fact the practice that these people have in mind. I'd like you to comment on that, and I don't know if you want to go here, but one interesting large voice that is completely absent and silent from this debate is one Barack Obama. Now, Barack Obama advocates a kind of anti-colonial point of view in his memoir called Dreams from My Father. He hasn't said a word about what's happened, even though he's quick to weigh in on a lot of things. He just weighed in about the Iranian woman who got the Nobel Prize, for example, but complete silence on this topic. Could you comment on this anti-colonialism issue and its relevance to what we're talking about?
Yeah, well, murderers always have a moral excuse for what they're doing. The Nazis justified what they were doing because they were in the pursuit of a pure Aryan race, and they were anti-Semitic. They believed that the Semitic people were inferior and that they were on a God-given mission to purify the world. ISIS also loves to justify what they're doing. They're also with this sort of anti-colonial narrative where they slaughter other Muslims, actually, because for them it's a theological thing, and if you're not Muslim enough for them, you deserve to die. This is a death cult, all right? And death cults always like to justify themselves. But what is so scary, Dinesh, as you pointed out, is in the West, rational people who are growing up in an otherwise normal society are starting to buy into this perverse narrative, and it's extraordinarily dangerous. For anybody who knows history, they know that Zionism was the ultimate anti-colonial project. Jews are from Judea, like Italians are from Italy, like Arabs are from Arabia. And the Jewish people have been fighting against the colonialization of our indigenous homeland for centuries. We were fighting against the Greek. We were fighting against the Romans. We fought against the Ottoman Empire. And then we fought against the British colonialism, where they were preventing Holocaust survivors from coming back to live in Israel. And once we did come to live in Israel, even though there's been a Jewish presence in Israel continually for the past, I don't know, what is it, like 4,000 years, we were then set upon by our Arab and Muslim neighbors who were trained, including the Mufti of Jerusalem, by the Nazis on how to engage in anti-Semitic propaganda, and then started to engage in pogroms before the state of Israel was established, slaughtering men, women, and children, also in their sleep, in their beds, in their homes. The Jewish people have been subjected to these types of pogroms for centuries. And that is why, Dinesh, I am so distressed that once again this is happening. How is it in 2023 that innocent Jewish men, women, and children are being slaughtered, and people are finding it to excuse this behavior? I'll never forget reading about Harvard and how they invited Nazi war criminals. And I think even today, it's not a fellowship, it's something is named still in Harvard today after a Nazi, and how American newspapers cozied up to the Nazis and played down their crimes. I've made it my mission, and Dinesh, I know it is your mission, and I know that everybody watching it is their mission to ensure that history does not repeat itself. And I have to say, the Jewish people are strong. We are resilient. We have a state. Jewish people around the world are mobilizing. Tomorrow, for example, in Rome, I will be appearing at an anti-terror rally that is happening here and speaking at it. We are out on the street and we are mobilizing in strength, in dignity, and in unity. So the one thing I think, just to conclude, is so important, and I have to say, I don't know any other term other than silver lining. Maybe you can help me, but I guess the one thing that I find encouraging right now is that you do see states announcing that they are cutting aid to the Palestinian Authority because they see who they are, the monsters that they are. We see different countries lighting up their monuments with the Israeli flag to show solidarity with the Jewish people. People of good conscience are waking up and they're vocally speaking out against Islamist terrorism, which is a scourge that affects the entire world, not just the Jewish state.
We'll be right back for a final segment with Brooke Goldstein. Guys, with the movie coming out this month, this is a great time to check out my Locals channel. The new film, Police State, will be posted at Locals. You can watch it there. And I post lots of exclusive content on Locals, including content that is censored on other social media platforms. On Locals, you get Dinesh Unchained, Dinesh Uncensored. You can also interact with me directly. I do a live weekly Q&A every Tuesday, so tomorrow, and no topic is off limits. I've also uploaded a bunch of other films to Locals, documentaries, feature films, my films, films by other independent producers. 2000 Mules is up there. And as I mentioned, new film coming out this month, Police State. I'll be giving you the inside scoop on locals. If you're an annual subscriber, you can stream and watch all of this content for free. So check out my channel. No charge to do that. It's dinesh.locals.com. I love to have you along for this great ride. Again, it's dinesh.locals.com. I'm back with Brooke Goldstein, human rights attorney, director of the Lawfare Project, thelawfareproject.org. You know, Brooke, we talked about moral equivalence, people equating what Israel does with what these terrorists do. Now, I'm a little more worried about another group. This is not the open champions of terrorism, but rather a second larger and perhaps more sly group. And this is the group that's going to wait for Israel to do something. And then when Israel responds, and I take it that the purpose of Netanyahu's declaration of war is that, look, once you do something like this, it is our job to level you so you can't do it again. But the moment that the Israeli army begins to move into Gaza, the moment that you begin to see scenes of destruction, that's when the second group is going to move in and go, wait a minute, the terrorists only killed 700 people. The moment that the Israelis kill more than 700 people, this is a disproportionate retaliation against what has happened. This now deserves equal condemnation from the... So this is a different kind of moral equivalence. Speak, if you will, to that.
Well, these same people who are silent and then jump and scream and condemn Israel and the IDF for engaging in operations that are meant to contain terror are absolutely silent as Hamas keeps its own people in an open-air prison, torturing and killing political prisoners daily, recruiting children as young as 3 years old for armed activities, recruiting children for suicide homicide attacks, slaughtering gays, hanging gays on the street, brutalizing women, honor-killing women, throwing gay people off balconies. They are silent at the torture and the imprisonment and the use of the entire Palestinian Arab community in Gaza as human shields by Hamas. And Israel, what's remarkable, has exercised so much restraint. It is because of the humanity of the IDF and the restraint that the IDF has exercised that we have this problem today. The IDF could absolutely annihilate Hamas, but for some reason, who knows why? Probably because they are afraid of the international condemnation, which I think is a big mistake, has refused until this day to get rid of this terroristic element that has terrorized not just their own people, but the people of Israel. You mentioned at the beginning, I have been under rocket attack with my family. We were sleeping in a bomb shelter for a week as 5,000 rockets were rained down on me and my children and my friends and my family and all the people, Christian, Druze, and Bedouin and Muslim that live in Israel and deserve to live in Israel in peace. And still the IDF does not do what it absolutely has the capability to do, which is annihilate the threat altogether. Because the IDF is the most humane army in the world. Look at the pictures coming out of Gaza. Look what they are doing to the dead, mutilated, naked bodies of young women that they have raped. They are parading them in the streets as the Palestinian Muslims hand out sweets and celebrate. No such activity happens in the civilized world, certainly not in Israel. It is forbidden in the Jewish religion to take any type of pleasure or to celebrate when you go to war and even when you have to kill and destroy an enemy. This is tragic. The entire thing is absolute tragedy. And I think finally the Western world is waking up. They are cutting aid to the murderous Palestinian Authority, whose first victims are innocent Palestinian children that they recruit and they incite and they indoctrinate towards hatred on a daily basis. So I want to thank you again, Dinesh, for really spreading the truth about this subject. The only way to fight against this destructive moral equivalence, which really is the death of freedom and the death of our great American societies, this moral equivalence, is to speak the truth, to go on social media, to spread the truth of who these people are and what they're doing. Because if you are, at this point, going out on the street and advocating in so-called pro-Palestinian rallies, which are clearly Hamas rallies where they're stomping on the flag of Israel, where they're chanting death to the Jews, you are pro-terror. And I think the world is waking up to see exactly what this movement is.
Brooke Goldstein, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I'm continuing my discussion of a chapter in Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. It's called The History of Our Sewage Disposal System, the various nationalities and groups that are being inhaled and sucked into the giant prison system known as the Gulag. Here is Solzhenitsyn. Just as the intelligentsia had never been overlooked in previous waves, it was not neglected in this one. A student's denunciation that a certain lecturer in a higher education institution kept citing Lenin and Marx frequently, but not Stalin at all, was all that was needed for the lecturer not to show up for lectures anymore. Wow. So you got a lecturer, and he probably knows that Stalin is doing all this arresting and mass murdering, and so he's still a communist. So he goes, I'm going to cite Marx, I'm going to cite Lenin, but I'm not going to cite Stalin. Well, they find out about it. Somebody reports him. Wait a minute, this guy's not citing Stalin. We don't have Stalin citations. And so he disappears. He's gone. He's into the Gulag. And then Solzhenitsyn says, he describes a sort of broad sweep of the arrests. Well, who in 1940 noticed the wave of wives arrested for failure to renounce their husbands? So the husband is arrested, but the wife doesn't say anything. If you don't renounce your husband, you're going to be arrested as well. They arrested an entire jazz orchestra playing at the Modern Cinema Theater because they were all considered enemies of the people. And then it says they arrested a bunch of Czechs who had run away. Remember when the Nazis invaded Czechoslovakia in 1939, they fled. These were Slavic people who fled to the USSR. It says, quote, it was impossible to guarantee that a single one of them was not a spy. They sent them all off to northern camps. So imagine running away from the Nazis into the arms of the Soviets, and guess what? You get put into a prison camp, so your fate is not really very much better. They took those who were too independent, too influential, along with those who were too well-to-do, too intelligent, too noteworthy. They took particularly many Poles from former Polish provinces. They arrested officers everywhere. And then, says Solzhenitsyn, right as they are going through this massive arrest scheme, World War II breaks out. Just as that moment, he says, the war burst upon us. And you might expect that because there's World War II, Stalin is going to now reconsider. Stalin's going to be like, wait a minute, I need the Russian people to rally behind me in the war. I can't keep arresting them left and right. But no, says Solzhenitsyn, the arrests, in fact, do not abate. They continue at full force. In fact, the arrests are given priority over even fighting the war. They talk about places that come under Nazi attack, and the Russians are now retreating. They're running away. They forgot to take whole fortresses with them, like the one at Brest. But they did not forget to shoot down political prisoners in the cells and courtyards of Lvov, Rovno, Tallinn, and many other prisons. In the Tartu prison, they shot 192 prisoners and threw their corpses down a well. So imagine the scene. The Nazis are encroaching. The Soviets have to retreat. So what do? They go, listen, we're not going to bother. We can't take everything. We're going to have to leave ammunition. We're going to have to leave fortresses. We're going to have to just run. But before we run, let's make sure we shoot all the prisoners. So we're not going to leave prisoners that the Nazis can then come and, quote, liberate. We're going to kill them before the Nazis get to them. And so they do. In 1941, the Germans went around Taganrog, cutting it off so swiftly that prisoners were left in freight wagons at the railway station, where they had been brought to be evacuated. What should one do with them? Certainly not set them free or leave them to the Germans. And so what they did was oil tank trucks were rushed to the station, the wagons were drenched with oil and set on fire, all the prisoners were burned alive. So the Nazis are almost here. We've got all these prisoners. We don't know what to do with them. Guess what? Let's just incinerate them. And so in an image that is somewhat reminiscent of the gas chambers, of course weren't ovens, but they used poison gas. But here you've got a sort of conflagration in which prisoners are simply set on fire. Then there was the wave of Germans living on the Volga, colonists in the Ukraine and the Northern Caucasus, Germans in general who lived anywhere in the Soviet Union. The determining factor here was blood, and even heroes of the Civil War and old members of the party who were German were sent off into exile. So here's the Soviets taking action against Germans. But these are German people who live in the Soviet Union. They are Russian citizens. They often have histories. I mean, these are countries that are not that far apart. And so even if they are party members, even if they've fought in the Civil War, in other words, the war in which the Bolsheviks were able to overthrow the other factions and then, of course, before that, defeat the Tsar, this counts for nothing. You're German, we're at war with the Germans, so we're going to be targeting you. And so you have here a prison system that is targeting people for whatever reason, sometimes an ideological reason, sometimes just the whim of Stalin, sometimes it's just bureaucratic procedure. We want so many people arrested. We haven't gotten that number. You're next. Step into the prison camp.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.